Okay, welcome everyone to RaizUp Sweden's panel this month on the importance of community. Our fantastic panel today includes Erika Szentmartoni, freelance project manager and head of operations at TEDx, and also recently program manager at Microsoft. Then we have Jill Leckie, who is a digital producer at Developed by Me and previous founder of Little Bear Abroad community here in Stockholm. Then we also have the wonderful Devi Verdi, who is Head of Diversity and Inclusion at our own community here, RaizUp. My name is Marjorie Sundström, and I'm the co-chapter leader of RaizUp Sweden, together with the lovely Evelyn Hamilton, who's also here today. For those of you who don't know, RaizUp is a global community for the hospitality and travel tech industry. It's a personalized career platform where members aim to inspire, empower, and elevate one another. Evelyn and I joined forces earlier this year to launch the RaizUp community here in Sweden. We want to bring our industry closer, highlight great people, and retain talent even during these difficult times in our industry. We also have RaizUp chapters all over the world, bringing together this truly inclusive community. So you can find out more on weraizup.com, and you can also contact us directly to get in touch with your local chapter leader. From our first two panel discussions on leadership and social media, we found ourselves constantly coming back to one common factor, which is community. So we therefore decided to focus this month's discussion on just that, the importance of community in organizations today and what happens when you achieve that true sense of belonging in an organization. So I will now hand you over to Evelyn, who will go through the housekeeping for today's event.
Thanks, Marjorie. So thank you everyone for coming today. Now I've muted everyone by default, so we won't be disrupted by any latecomers. But if you do want to talk, just click the microphone icon in the bottom bar to either mute or unmute yourself. And you can also choose to have your camera on or off. And please do mute your microphone when you're not speaking, so that will help minimize the presenting underwater sound or interruptions from any barking dogs. When the panel is talking, feel free to chat in the box and let me know if you can't see or hear something, or throughout the entire panel, just make some messages and I'll keep track of them, and we'll come back to your questions at the end, and you can also ask the panel questions yourself. And feel free to email us on raizup.sweden@weraizup.com. Over to you, Marjorie.
Thank you, Evelyn. So guys, very welcome. Thank you so much for being our panelists here today. When I first joined RaizUp, it was really clear to me that this is a community and not just a network. Can you please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your communities that you've created, and tell us the difference between what you feel the difference between a community and a network is. So if we start with Erika.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation first. It's great to have you here, to be here. Yes, so my name is Erika and I am Hungarian, living in Stockholm for the past 7 years. I have been in the hospitality industry for 10 years now. Started in the UK and then fell in love with my Swedish husband and moved to Stockholm. Here in Stockholm, I have been the past 5-6 years freelancing, and I have been involved with many different organizations. But I have always had the niche of the tech communities, the startup founders, the developers, always around technology. Plus, I have been with TEDx Stockholm for 4 years as well, which is a little bit outside of the tech bubble that I have been working with, but it's been a great journey at TEDx Stockholm. And as you mentioned, yes, I have just recently, this is my day 3 at Microsoft Sweden, where I will be creating exactly that, the developers community for their Reactor program. So yeah, this is me in a nutshell. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Erika. And Jill?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me on the panel today, because community is something that's really close to my heart. I am originally from Scotland, but I have lived now in Sweden for 6 years. I arrived in Sweden at a time when there wasn't as much infrastructure in place for newly arrived individuals, especially international parents or people who were about to become parents. And I developed, or out of that frustration that I felt, I developed a community called Little Bear Abroad. And it was specifically for international parents who had newly arrived in Sweden. And they're looking for connection, looking for, belonging, a sense of belonging, and kind of reimagining their identity in this new place through finding people who were like-minded, people who were also seeking the same answers that they were, and to the most base level, just finding friends. So that's something that I've worked for 6 years with, and it was a very organic process. There was no particular strategy that long-term strategy that we looked at, but as we soon began to realize that it was moving from a community organization into a commercial entity, because we were beginning to develop events and products that surrounded it, we quickly decided we had to change. We had to up our strategy game and turn it into something that was more, more long-term. But unfortunately, like so many things in the service industry and in the hospitality industry, the pandemic took us out. So because of course our whole entire, the community essence was basically around gathering. And very quickly in Sweden and Stockholm, especially, the international community decided that they would prefer to self-isolate than gather. And despite the digital modern technology assets that we had, we weren't able to continue much with what we were doing. So, but we're continuing the legacy of the community through a podcast that I produced called the Swedish Podcast. And that's now the continuation of that community. But yeah. And if you were to ask me what the difference between a community and a network is, I think it's that sense of commonality. I think it's about commonality, finding that niche, and it is usually quite a niche aspect that people want to gather around and learn around. And I think a network is something which is more about connections rather than commonality. And I think that's my lay way of introducing that.
Sorry, I forgot to answer that question.
Yeah, go ahead, Erika. What do you think?
No, just like, oh, oopsie. Yes. Can I just say that now?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. To me, difference between community and network is network is in your head, community is in your heart. Community is that you belong somewhere. You feel happy, you feel welcome, you feel glad. You're just happy to be there. You make friends, you develop yourself. A network is something that you can like your network, not that I'm not saying that, but something that is driven by your head, professionally. So that is for me the main difference between the community and network.
Mm-hmm. That's so important, especially with hospitality and travel as well, that it is so many feelings that is attached to our product essentially as well. So yeah, we're going to Devi. What do you think?
It's so thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to be here, and I think just to add a bit of color, it's interesting that you say, Marjorie, that hospitality it's feeling, right? It is, because it's a product that's tangible, right? It's something that you can touch, from a hotel, airline, whether it's a mobility car, so you're able to sit in something, so you have that sense of feeling. It's very different to tech, which is software, and you're selling something very different, right? It's a product, so to speak. So anyway, bit about myself. I think that might be helpful for those that are tuning in, listening in. So as Marjorie mentioned, I'm Devi Verdi. I head up diversity inclusion for RaizUp, and Marjorie gave a really lovely introduction of who RaizUp as a community are. And in fact, you know, our sort of founder CEO is a lady called Rita Varga. I joined what was known as Women in Hospitality Travel Tech a year ago now, and as a sort of, you know, social enterprise, or basically community, which is what we are. You know, we really advocate for a more diverse and inclusive culture, right, across various different markets, which are represented not just in EMEA, in Asia Pacific, and in the US and Africa as well. And our mission, I always say, it's about inspiring, it's leveraging that and retaining talent, not just female talent, but talent across the hospitality and the tech industry sector, you know, and really championing those underrepresented groups, right? And for me, in fact, I'd say over the past 12 months, it's been such a reward to support some of the businesses in the sector. Really, from my perspective, it's very business specific. So it's really helping them build, you know, their diversity inclusion strategies across various markets. My own personal story, I'm originally from Hong Kong. I was born and brought up there. I studied in Sydney in Australia, so it's not that far from Hong Kong. So I was able to go over there, and I've been in the UK for now 20 years. And this is where I call home for now. So really in what I do, I bring my Chinese, I bring my Asian, I bring my Western diversity mix to the table. I bring all my intersectionalities to the table in what we do. And to answer that very first question, you know, what's the difference between a network and a community? Well, you know, I've got very strong networks within the D&I space, within the sort of HR network space, which I value and I use because it's where I'm inspired, it's where I learn, it's where I engage, it's where I also have very strong connections, right? But a community is very much of where you have an affinity with, right? There's a commonality with it. There's a shared interest with. And in fact, you know, from a business perspective, there are so many organizations that now have what you call affinity groups, right? Or you can call them business resource groups or employee resource groups. I mean, Microsoft, you have a number of them. You know, some of the travel brands are starting to come up with them, not all, but some of them are, whether they're sort of the women-led networks or the LGBTQ plus networks. You know, there are the affinity groups that exist within the organizations themselves. It's about bringing people together who have an identity that they can relate to, or that they want to also understand and learn more about. So that for me is the difference between the two. And it's great to see, you know, how, you know, people are in both, right? I'm part of a network and I'm part of a community, and I love it because I learn, I'm inspired by both. And I see the sort of sustainable movement between them.
That's great. I've only just realized now as well that it's a RaizUp Sweden panel, but we're actually, none of us are actually originally from Sweden. So it just goes to show. And I don't think actually, no, we might have a few from Sweden on who are actually listening in now live. But
does it matter if I'm
other than that, there's
Swedish?
actually.
I've got
paper.
a Swedish.
Yes, me too. Yeah. Yeah.
We've got Anton, we've got
funny
Anton
that
and
I think it is an international need. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it is
so.
kind of an international need here in Sweden for developing that community. I can't even find a direct translation of community in Swedish.
There isn't one.
No.
Not in the sense of belonging and identity and affinity. As Debbie was saying, there's not a direct translation, I don't think.
Debbie, just what you were saying was kind of leads on so much well to my next question that I wanted to ask you as well. Why do you feel that it's so important for organizations and all that you've done with helping organizations build their D&I framework? Why is it important for organizations to focus on building a diverse and inclusive community?
It's a great question, Marjorie, right? I think, from a business point of view, from an organization point of view, it's not just a political correct trend, right? And you most probably have heard various different terms in what diversity means, inclusion means. I guess from a simple terms, diversity is the mix, right? Inclusion, it's about getting that mix to work well together. That's as simple as it is for, I guess, anybody who is still not sure what the two terminology means, right? And diversity and inclusion, it's there to, help organizations or communities, in fact, grow. What's really interesting is some organizations I see do diversity and inclusion, right? Only because they believe it's the right thing to do, right? But the reality is there are plenty of now statistical evidence that is out there. There's a Deloitte report, there's a PwC report, there are enough benchmark practices and data points to really show that actually organizations that have more diverse teams outperform their competitors by twofolds, right? So what does that mean? It means that actually as a business, you are stronger at innovation. You foster better decision making. Why? Because you have different people around a room who've got different ideas that come to the table, right? That want to challenge the status quo and look at things with a different lens. It also increases employee engagement. So that piece of connection, right, is really important. And I think if anything from last year, we realized how important mental health was, right? And well-being. Well, there's that piece that comes into the whole D&I agenda is actually how it supports, employee well-being when you foster that inclusion piece that comes in. And ultimately, there's an impact, there's a positive impact to an organization's bottom line, right? Because that is what business leaders need to see, right? They need to see what is happening in D&I, fundamentally, that there's an output, just like CSR is, right? So it's really important that that link is there. From a travel point of view, comparatively to other sectors, I've got to say, look, it's great that the sector is looking to learn. I applaud the, organizations that's there, but that dial needs to move, and it needs to move faster, right? It's not moving fast enough. I think there are quite a lot of organizations that are perhaps can be bolder to actually make, outward statements. And it's great to see some of the American airlines who are very much ahead of the trend, and really sort of putting down their pledges in the space, when it talks about, really driving that diversity and inclusion piece. But I think, an importance for diversity and inclusion, it's broken down for me into three cases. You have the business case, you have an employee case, and you have a customer case, right? It's three folds. And it's ultimately, it's a business enabler, Marjorie. So, if you want to have improved performance, if you want productivity, engagement, I mean, the list goes on, right? That's where a diverse and inclusive community comes together. And the more it grows, it's as simple as that. It's no longer just a nice to have, or it's a right thing to do. It's a business imperative. So if you want to remain competitive in your space, you're going to need that. And that's where it comes into. And, building a diverse and inclusive community, it's really creating a sustainable movement. I mean, this is really important, that whole sustainability piece that's coming into the fold, because social sustainability is all about people. It is all about people. So it's really important to bear that in mind.
Yeah, while we've got Erika, I really want Erika to be able to talk about that, because unfortunately Erika's going to have to go at the top of the hour. But Erika, you really have this platform within TEDx to bring diverse people together, to give them a voice. How is a selection made on that to kind of say, these people are the ones that are going to spotlight? It'd be really interesting to know.
Yes, unfortunately, I do have to leave at 12 o'clock. Well, first of all, I can only second every single word that Devi said. I think you've placed that beautifully. So yeah, but at TEDx Stockholm, if you mean like who is getting on our stage and who we get to have their voice heard, it doesn't matter who you are at TEDx Stockholm. It doesn't matter where you come from. We don't care if you're black or white, Asian or Western, young or old. It is about who you are and what you have in your heart and in your head. That's basically it. What it is that drives you to make something bigger, something larger, something better. What is your mission that wants to erupt? This is all that we look for. And Jill actually has also recently joined to the TEDx Stockholm team, and she actually is working in the speakers team, where she is looking into the future potential speakers. So she can also highlight on that and her work, how we choose our speakers. So we really don't look about where you come from. It's what drives you.
Yeah, it's the idea. It's not the person. It's actually the idea. If the idea, if we think the idea is worth sharing, then that's the stage is yours. So it's really, as Erika said, it's really about what is in your heart and what is in your head when it comes to ideas. And obviously, can you back them up as well? Is this idea something that is whether it could be scientific, it could be theoretical, it could be, as long as there is the science to back it up, or the theory to back it up, or the anecdotal evidence to back it up, because a lot of it's personal stories and personal journeys that people have taken, and out of these personal stories and personal journeys that people have taken, they've come to realizations and ideas that they feel will change other people's lives and the world around them. So that's how that's how ideas get chosen.
Exactly. So when a potential speaker comes around, we never look at their LinkedIn profile. Don't really Google them up. Like, where do you come from? What names do you have behind you? That thing does not matter at whatsoever. In fact, the smaller you are, the better, because we feel that we can and we want to give you that platform to be the next Greta Thunberg who will change the world. And we have had many different speakers that have reached a huge number of followers after following their talks, and before that they were nobodies. So yeah, this is something we really want to focus on, that to try to find the people who don't have that voice and give them the voice. We don't want famous people on our stage. Simple as that, to be honest.
TEDx is it's very focused on the individuals, and it can be quite personal as well. How do you, Erika, how have you worked in your experience of using that to encourage community engagement in organizations through events?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You were a little bit breaking up.
Sorry, how have you used your experience with TEDx to help organizations with community engagement in their events?
Within TEDx, so what we believe,
or in general as a freelancer as well.
Okay, apart from, okay. So I think community is not data. This is not just data, how many people you have on your mailing list, or it's not just your profit who buys your tickets to your events or buys your product. It somewhat is, but it's not all that. And what we at TEDx Stockholm, what I have also put in different projects, is that to prolong the event, to have them involved before, during, and after the event. Have them have them involved, make them voice heard. That's pretty much the gist of it. How can we prolong that sense that the short time that we have the event, make it not just 1-2 hours or 6 hours, whatever the length of the event. Make it have it for like 2 or 3 months, you know, from the very beginning that you start to work on that. Have them involved, ask their questions. Not that long ago at TEDx.com, we had a photo competition event where we wanted our community to send their photos. I do know that we're going to have an event in November as well. And I can't say, but it's going to happen, how to involve our community, but it's going to come out soon. And we're taking that next step of involving our community. I'm really, really looking forward to that. What is going to happen there, because I think this is something super, super new. We've never done that before. And I think it's going to be awesome. And that's just going to give our community, our fans, another level of belonging.
That's fantastic. It's like Debbie said as well, that a community has an affinity with each other. So everybody who attends that event have something in common already, because they're interested in that topic. So it's amazing, to kind of prolong that experience. But thank you very much, Erika, for joining us. We know that you have to hop off early, but we really, really appreciate it. And have a great weekend in the sunshine. I see you sitting outside as well.
It's going to be super hot this weekend. So yes, thank you so much. And yes, I do need to hop out. Unfortunately, I have another meeting in a minute.
Perfect.
So thank you so much for having me here.
Perfect.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
Erika.
everybody.
Bye.
Everyone else can stay. Everyone else stays.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. We're all staying on.
We're still staying for the community. Actually, is it okay, Margie, if I ask Jill a question about something that Erika said, which is about the continuation of developing community? And I want to speak to Jill, because Jill, that's exactly something that you've done, isn't it? You've evolved something that was a community into something else. How did you think of that? How did you think of turning from something from a community into a podcast?
That's a really good question. And I actually, before answering that, I want to go back to something that Devi said earlier, about the kind of, having the diversity in the community is the driver for many businesses. And in Sweden, we're at the moment, there's a lot of discussion around something called perspektivtäthet, and that means perspective density. And it's this kind of idea that the more perspectives, the more different, visions that you have within that business, within that community, within that culture, will then drive forward, as Debbie said, much more ingenuity, much more problem solving, and be able to overcome things like pandemics, basically, because you'll have the people in the businesses who will be able to see it from so many different angles and perspectives, whether it's the single mom which is at home, or whether it's the mom that has to stay home with 2 kids and 5 dogs, or whatever. It's all that kind of different, that perspective density is required. So it's something that I'm very when we were running Little Bear Abroad, that was something that we were very aware of and very keen to promote within the community. And we had one commonality, which we were international parents, but we had people from all over the world, people who had different experiences from different cultures, from different ways of parenting, from different backgrounds, and they all came to Sweden with very, very different expectations of what life was going to be like. So it was about kind of managing those groups within a community and those expectations and realities within a community through different perspectives. But yeah, so to answer your question, Evelyn, as I was saying before, there wasn't very much strategy put behind it, I have to admit. I'm aware that in this day and age, you have to have a business strategy or a digital strategy, or some kind of strategy for everything that happens in order to keep it going. But there really wasn't that much strategy. It was the decision to close the business, to close the community, was one that was done through necessity, because of financial reasons, but also through personal reasons, because I I was running the community by myself at that point, and it was just unsustainable. And the pressures economically were just too much to kind of continue. But there was this still kind of calls from within the community to say, yeah, but we need something. We need to have something which keeps us all together, or keeps us going, or has, creates that kind of affinity which they really wanted. And, people at that time, they weren't meeting, they weren't gathering in places. They weren't, and Zoom fatigue had set in, and nobody wanted to talk on digital between screens anymore. But people loved listening to stories, and it was storytelling. And that's how people they felt connected to one another, because they could relate to the storytelling that was happening. And it was we'd already started a very small podcast at that moment. And it was a natural evolution from that point, Let's continue the storytelling. Let's continue the thing that people enjoy doing and enjoy relating to, and can do easily and safely at that point, which was during in the middle of a pandemic. So that's how that was the natural progression, the development of the community into storytelling. And it's great now, because we're in a position where we can start to meet. So we're going to start doing live podcast recordings, and we're going to start to have gatherings around the podcast and meetups and things like that. So it's great, and that's going to be that's the development, the development strategy for that. So
I feel like that was an exclusive, Jill. You've just dropped.
Was it?
Exclusive. Yeah.
Evelyn got very excited about it.
Yeah, got very excited there. Well, you heard it here first. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's actually really interesting as well. Devi, what do you feel is actually going to be the future of community, and how will tech evolve to help communities in the future?
What do I think is important? It's achieving that whole sense of belonging, right? In a community and a network, right? It's both. It's not one or the other, because they're not mutually exclusive. I think it's really important to understand that, and that whole sense of belonging, right? We talk about it, and I've this is part of the sort of conversation, but that's part of that jigsaw piece about, does it bring that whole psychological safety into the space, right? Some of you may or may not have heard that term. It's a term that's very widely used within sort of the sort of D&I function, but it's about creating a safe space, right? Where actually, as individuals, particularly from a business point of view, or in a community or a network, is that you're able to be, yourself, right? And you might have heard the terminology about being able to bring your whole self to work, right? Well, I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever always brought my whole self to work, right? But I definitely wouldn't want some of my team, who perhaps how they are on a Friday night, I wouldn't want them to bring that side of their work, right? Do you know what I mean? So it's about bringing your best self to work. That's what it's about, right? That's what you're there to do the job. So, it's about bringing your best self to work. That's how you thrive. That's how teams come together, right? That's the innovation. That's where diversity comes in, right? Because diversity drives that innovation. It supports that sense of belonging. When we limit who can contribute, right? We in turn limit the problems we can solve.
Yep.
And that's really important.
Couldn't agree more.
To remember that.
Couldn't agree more.
Right?
And
you
talked about that. Sorry, you talked about that with decision making as well. I feel that if you give others a voice in an organization that perhaps didn't have that before, then they feel more empowered to speak up. It is also a question of self-confidence as well. That perhaps someone does have something to say, but are afraid to say it because they may feel that their idea won't be listened to. So what's the point of bringing it up? So I think that's
very valid, and it's so important, that point that you've just made there, Marjorie, right? That's about creating that sense of belonging for all, right? For everyone, not just the majority, right? It's also for the minority. And, you know, creating a sense of belonging for our teams, our staff, it's not a science. It's really important to understand. It's actually more about a process of what I would say, you know, reverting back to basic principles of human interaction, you know, really, really with our normal patterns, right? Checking in on new members within your team. You know, these are basic things, right? Being open to and recognizing and incorporating those new ideas that are coming through, not shutting them down. And, you know, we know that this contributes to a positive work environment, right? And I mean, I've seen very, you know, firsthand experience in terms of how, you know, a sense of belonging is actually framed well and truly beyond what D&I is all about, right? And I would say also, if I look at the continuation of remote working, so right now, what is happening actually in the last 15 months, you know, the impact of that whole digital work. So we talk about tech, the whole impact of the digital workplace, right? It's going to require a more sense of creating a sense of belonging for that workforce, for your organization, and for people, because employees need to feel included within the company. They need to feel that they're still part of the vision, the mission, when they're in their, you know, home environment, because everything is now blurred, right? Your personal and your professional life has completely blurred. It has for the last 12 months. So it's really important, you know, and we know through studies, there's plenty of research out there that actually when you're creating that sense of belonging, it increases team citizenship and loyalty. So it's really important to bear that in mind.
But
Yeah,
that
and I would
also
say,
applies to guests as well, because guests are also people in hotels or in travel in general. And if you create that brand with a sense of belonging, then you also create in turn brand loyalty, and also that unique sense, not just a sense of belonging, but a sense that they want to contribute as well. That's why you get more reviews on TripAdvisor, for example. People want to voice their experience, whether they want to make it better or they want to say how good it was. It's in any case, it's engagement with the brand, and it's how you take that up. That then we talked a lot about this with Monica Hilm, actually, about her book as well, that if you look at it from a HR perspective, then in turn it will actually show in your guests as well.
So
and I think, you know,
sorry, I was just going to say, it goes back to what I said earlier on. It's that consumer case, right? There's always three cases to it. Yeah. The consumer case is your customer. It's that customer that's there. And in this world, the customer is the end user, whoever that may be, the person getting on a flight, the person who's stepping into the hotel environment, the person who's stepping into a car, right? Because it's from a mobility angle. So it's exactly that. Sorry, Jill.
No, I was going to put my digital producer hat on and say, you know, we're now looking at the next 50 years of digitalization, the Internet of Things. And it's we're now kind of going, okay, well, where's it going to go from here? What's the next step? And so businesses it's the consumer, it's the customer. That's where we're going. And any digital product or, you know, software as a service, anything like that, it's going to be it has to be directed at the consumer, and in that case, and with that in mind, it has to be looking at not just doing, you know, your kind of your basic market research, you know, let's find out what the consumer thinks about this product. It's about putting the consumer first and building the product around that. And I think when it comes to digitalization, we have there is, I can't even get my head around the kind of products that are currently being developed using digitalization. I mean, if you look at Gartner's like curve of digital products that are coming out in the next, you know, 10 to 15 years, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing what we're going to be able to produce for consumers using digital products, but it will be centered around community. And it will be centered around making consumers feel seen and feel a sense of belonging and affinity to products and brands and services. That's where it's going to be. So if you can put together a digital product or some kind of, or another, or physical product that centers around a customer's affinity and a customer's, belonging to your brand through digitalization, and that's scalable, you're onto a winner.
It's difficult to put words to it, isn't it? I think Erika really knocked the nail on the head there, saying that community is about the heart. And it is. It's when you feel that deep emotion to a brand that is what is a success, really. We're running out of time now, so I'm just going to round it up now. I want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. We, in true Swedish style, will be taking a summer break, and we'll be returning in August, and we'll have some great discussions ahead. In the meantime, Evelyn and I will now evaluate our first events, and we want to hear your feedback. So do feel free to reach out to us. We have our email address in the chat as well. We will appreciate everyone's support so far, and we look forward to some really great, exciting times ahead. So thank you from all of us, and glad sommar. See you guys.
Thanks so much.
Hej då.